The Alternative Digitalk. Real issues, real talk.
Hi Rogers, can I ask you something?
Shoot.
What does corruption mean?
Well, summarily, corruption is abuse of public power for personal gain or for the benefit of a group to which one owes allegiance. For example, when a public office is abused by an official accepting or soliciting a bribe. By the way, private people can be corrupt too, like bribing police officers to escape fines.
Okay. So exactly how does that concern me?
Well, do you pay taxes?
I guess, yeah. What does that have to do with this?
Everything. Because those taxes you pay are supposed to facilitate services you use, like water, electricity, roads construction, medicines in hospitals, name it.
Okay, that is much bigger than I thought. But it can be stopped, right?
Well, yes it can, although it may not be as easy as it sounds. And here is the reason why. Corruption roots are grounded in our country's social, political, economic, bureaucratic traditions and policies.
So, what has kept it going this long? I mean, why don't we stop it?
Well, the main reason why it has been here for so long is because institutions are weak, either as a result of poorly defined ethical standards of public service, weak administrative and financial systems, or ineffective watchdog agencies.
What can we do to stop it?
At a national level, we must focus on strengthening the independence and effectiveness of public institutions that fight corruption. At a personal level, we must commit to never giving a bribe.
I promise I'll never give a bribe.
Well, that's a great decision you have made. Me and you now have to spread this message to all our friends. If we all do our part, corruption will be no more.
This message is brought to you by Alternative Digitalk. The Alternative Digitalk. Real issues, real talk.
A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you to today's edition of the Hotline Show. My name is Rogers Toyawe, and it's a very interesting time to be alive in Uganda today. The date is 6th. It's Monday, the date is 6th, the month is November, the year is 2023. I'm joined by Mr. Ochieno Joseph, and later on we'll be joined by Mr. Odaka Asuman, who's a General Secretary for the National Economic Empowerment Dialogue. Mr. Ochieno is one of the leaders of the UPC. He has said again and again that position, so I do not need to go back to explaining all of that. But yes, he's one of the sort of the torchbearers for that party, and one who's directly and obviously has good intentions for that party, and I hope that they make strides in the right direction. So today we're going to be talking about two main issues, unless otherwise, of course. One being the current issues that have been making rounds in our news, the president's denial of the Amin Institute as had been proposed by some individuals, and we want to understand a little bit of what that means and why did the president seem so interested in that he even had to conclude by saying, please forget that history and let's move forward. So we want to understand a little bit of that, because if a person has been a president before, I think it's imperative that we remember them. They might have done some wrong things, but they also did some good things, and as much as everyone else does. So we're going to talk about that, and also, of course, we'll talk about Agoa and what the economic implications are for Uganda from moving away from being suspended from that pact by the US. And of course, the people who are experts who have always seen all of these economic things at the international scale, especially Mr. Ochieno, are going to be telling us a little bit what that means later on in the hour. But for now, let me invite him to say hello, and we will begin from there. Good morning, good evening, sir.
It's a pleasure to be here, and always with you. You're a fantastic young man.
Thank you, sir.
One of the many feedbacks I get about this program is actually that you're a very steady presenter. And you know, because I have been in the media for a bit of time, both home and abroad, I have a reasonable following. And many times people who watch programs like these I think then are very anxious to test who then is with me in the panel, but particularly in this case, who the presenter. So that really is to your credit. And that said, though, I find it extraordinary, with pleasure, that you're an extremely excited young man, that you believe there's no better time to live in this country than today. I hope at some stage you're able to qualify what exactly you mean, but I don't want to put you on the spot. But no, it's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, so to begin with, I wanted to understand when, first of all, we want to appreciate, of course, your time for always making time to be here with us, and the fact that this is predominant in a youth-led sort of initiative, and the biggest following being also in that category. So we do appreciate the insights that you do provide from that perspective.
Yeah.
So today we want to understand, first of all, the whole idea about the Amin Institute that had been introduced by a former member of parliament, Mr. Fungaru, and some other individuals, of course. I also understand that the family later sort of distanced themselves from the initiative, saying they weren't consulted by the idea. But just a little bit for you, first of all, the idea of having the institution itself, what do you think about that?
I think I need to deal with the disclaimer immediately. When I first heard about this, I had a mixed opinion, mixed feeling. I really didn't have any strong views about it, and I'll explain why when I particularly link that with some of the initiatives I've been part of as far as, say, President Obote is concerned. But then as soon as I got M7'S reaction and reactions, and as soon as, and I know you may be bringing that as a latter question, but I think I have to bring it at the onset, as soon as I saw and read and heard about M7'S reactions, I said, what cheek, Mr. Museveni? And so, what moral authority does Museveni, not Museveni of 1970, who was a junior official in the president's office as a public servant, as a junior researcher in Obote's office, but Museveni, who after Tanzania went to the bush, was part of UNLA, started no lule, no work beatings of people in the city square of Kampala when Lule fell, introduced Pandagari, which, I get really irritated when people try to link Pandagari with Milton Obote. No, Pandagari was a Museveni thing, actually started with a no lule, no work. Granted, elements of Pandagari may have happened, Obote to government when now security services would possibly round up certain people as suspects linked to NRA, which now evidence provides that they were there. Beyond that, then Museveni of Luweero. Beyond that, then Museveni who comes and breaks up our national institutions, particularly economic institutions, as we shall discuss. And beyond that, that Museveni that takes terror to northern and eastern Uganda. And beyond that, the Museveni that has now perfected, almost trying to justify a perfect element of a Balalo presence in an actually post-conflict place. Beyond that, the Museveni in whose hands, even today, there was a demonstration in Nagongera, by the way. This is breaking news for your station. I'm very disappointed you never ran this. And about Nagongera Road, the road I've been singing about and campaigning about in the last, since 2005. I was just not able to join them in Tororo. But I understand, the police roughed up people, and some of the leaders are actually in police cell. And by the way, Tororo police, please release these people. But I'm told they've swiftly charged.
They
and
arrested
prison.
people
Arrested,
because
yes,
of
yes,
protesting.
Protesting for the bad roads in Tororo. And one of those is Edmund Abela, a fantastic independent councillor, from the neighboring sub-country of mine. And I take strong exception. This guy had just had a fantastic wedding a few months ago. It's hardly a year, actually. A fantastic, beautiful wife with 2 young children, and is now languishing in either police cell or prison simply for leading a protest to demand for tarmacking or the Nagongera Road or perhaps the state of the road. I said, after 24, since Museveni came to power, there's no inch of an extra road in Tororo. Now, I'm saying, if this then is the Museveni, Nagongera Road, which was supposed to have been tarmacked in 1989 under UPC 10-year program, Nagongera Road, which the tarmac has disappeared, including town. By then, Nagongera Road Forget about Nagonga Road in Nagongera. Nagonga Road within Tororo, the first 1 kilometer from the main roundabout between Mbale, Jinja, and Malaba Road, meaning in senior quarters, is extraordinarily in a bad state. And so to respond to that, and this is the Museveni who says that Amin does not have the right to be, I mean, there's no, okay, Amin's people don't have the right to recognize him.
Yes.
That is cheeky. But that said, Amin overthrew my government. In fact, it was not Museveni. Museveni would just have been a tourist in Obote's government, what we now know. But, Amin overthrew my government. Amin, killed my area MP and minister. Amin killed my father's godson, who was in Barara, in the police services. And so I have nothing to say nice about Amin. But Amin and Museveni, they're all the same because they came to power by force. They overthrew governments. And they came, and in Museveni's case, not only overthrowing a government, but subjected this country, and including Kampala, to massive terror. So he doesn't have that moral authority. Now, that said, Institute, so then fast forward the Institute, then you asked rightly, sir, I heard that apparently my good friend Hungaro possibly had not sought the permission to the family, but also know families can also be have their own issues. Sometimes they can they can have some of their own internal politics. I hope that's not the case. But to the extent, anyway, that Amin's family was not consulted, then the issue is not necessarily whether or not an institute like that should be there or Museveni's statement, but basically meaning therefore that it was a false start from the beginning. But in the event that Amin's family decided that they wanted to remember Amin, the man who's responsible for killing Brigadier Okoya, Amin, the man who's responsible for killing Archbishop Janan Luwum, and Amin, the man who's responsible for killing my area MP, Amin, the man who's also responsible for killing, or both of whom another eminent minister was actually his minister for internal affairs and I think and defense, one of my Toro top guys, then would I welcome it? No. But do we have a right to say no for them to set up anything in memory of Idi Amin? Neither here nor there. Lumumba, Amin's son, has been sometimes very irritating in social media, trying to present his father like some mini saint. And sometimes actually, very cheeky actually, sometimes he walks on the path of Milton Obote and puts some funny negative things on my president who saved his father from 1964 up to 1971. But there is things to do with basic rights and principles. Now, an institute for what? I'm saying that if you put Amin aside, Milton Obote, the father of this country, thankfully chose that he would be buried in Akokoro, where his ancestral parents and grandparents are. And so the Kololo thing was neither here nor there, Don't forget, Museveni had threatened to shoot Milton Obote on arrival home. So actually, when Jim and I returned in 2005, one of our concerns was that what's Museveni going to do to the aircraft coming with us? Number one. And then number two, once Obote then dies, we now came in this private aircraft and carrying the remains of my president, and all of us were there. And I want to say, possibly for the first time, public, in this kind of forum, that sometimes you feel scared. Museveni might bring down this aircraft, kind of stuff. So anyway, we landed at Entebbe and all this happened. But then after that, I've been a party to the conversations around Dr. Milton Obote's memorial lecture. I was one of the founding brains to Milton Obote memorial lectures. And because of many other issues, it has not been an annual lecture. But that is how we thought it would work and would lead to many other things. And I also know that as UPC leads, others follow. All of a sudden, these days, I hear the memorial lectures, many,
Yes,
you hear them, don't you? You check your records.
The lectures
You'll find it very interesting that there was hardly any 10 years, 10, 15 years ago. But so Milton Boda's memorial lecture were our ideas. We did it, and that is fine. Sometimes there's some people who still celebrate Milton Boda's birthday, 28th of December. Of course, then I'm not comparing Museveni and Obote and Amin and Obote, but I'm simply saying that, well, some of those are initiatives that you do not necessarily need to seek guidance, counsel from the state. Final point, though, is that because Quartz is an institute, and I'm not quite sure what kind of institute would be. Is it something which is going to be like, and that's why I told about our memorial lecture, personally, everything. You start having an institute, and then the institute is what? Maybe recently, because there were these exhibitions about health, education, roads, things like that. When those things were shown, I also saw very erroneous things attributed to Idi Amin in desperate to talk down Museveni. Most of the things mentioned are actually things founded by Milton Obote or foundation by Milton Obote's first government. But granted, Amin did certain things in this country. So maybe that would have been the motivation that, come to think of it, after 50 years, actually, the things Amin did and the several things that Museveni has failed to do and killed. So let's now have an institute for him. In that institute, what kind of, what would be the syllabus? What kind of
What would be the value? Yes.
Yeah, precisely. And so those are kind of things. Because honestly, you see him going there, Museveni say Kampora. If you say that, well, Amin came when the community fell, for East African Airways Corporation, Uganda Airlines first founding was Amin. Yes, it's fair to give credit to the timing, but I don't think it was Amin. The East African community had collapsed. We had East African Airways Corporation, for information, young citizens. And so when the community fell, the airlines broke into their pieces, so Uganda naturally had to have its own. So the Uganda Airlines was constituted. And then we had some aircraft. In fact, there was disputes. Kenya cheated Uganda on a number of things. I don't know whether the airlines is one of those things. I think some railers. Airlines, actually, I think Kenya took a lot more, of some of these other things. So Amin had that. Do you then say that for that we say Amin Institute, and then we study how Amin launched Uganda Airlines or not? I do not know.
The contents are different, because also myself, I haven't found what exactly that institute was
going to be. And it was never discussed, and that's what I'm bringing that we, yes.
And I've seen the back and forth between Fungaru and his lawyers and about all of this thing about the president after he issued the statement. But none of it mentioned what exactly is the institute going to do, what is the value. Because it's one thing to celebrate a name, but it's another thing to have a substance that is attached to that name. But just also to get context from you, who has a little bit of some knowledge, not a little bit, about this history, would you say, are there things you would say Amin did that even for the slightest is something to celebrate from his administration?
One big thing that Ugandans, and sometimes Ugandans, shy away from is the bold decision to expel Asians. So on the one hand, people see that as a big thing, primarily for the reason, on the other, that it enabled, empowered Ugandan citizens, that transferred the economy to the hands of Ugandans. So there is a very tempting argument for people that that was a good thing Amin did. I suggest that it was wrong. I suggest that it was wrong because the Obote One government was already working on the question of Asians, and Amin opportunistically picked onto it and did it badly. The issue of the Asian question in the 60s was, which is still economical. One, we already had, meaning UPC already had issues with the British, the nationalization of some of the British companies. Two, Obote was then very concerned, and young Ugandans, that's why you should join UPC, because it's your party, it's the genuine party then, today, and in the future. On the basis of what I'm saying. So look, we want indigenous banks, that's enabling. We want indigenous insurance institutions. We want indigenous institutions, colleges, institutions. So when it came to big projects like constructions, I've said this, I think, on this program. What I said, look, when you come with your Molim technology or China Construction Industries Limited, you will come, we shall have discussions about money and other things, whatever. But when it comes to certain skilling element, we don't expect some of you guys to smoking pipe and cigarette down the corridor, just rolling pipes as if we don't have engineers. So we'll have to enable our people, things like that. And then, on the Asian question, I'm not really taking it, it's a very important point.
Yes.
On the question, the Asian question, there was this thing about Asians that passed by here, and the British had basically used this place as just like a grazing place, like Museveni wants to use a part of Kapaso actually basically as a grazing place for him and his folks.
And maybe time granted, I'd also like us to eat.
Yeah, so I said no. But I said, look, we need to have a conversation about the Ugandan nation, about the Asians in Uganda. The Asians who are from India at that time, India, Pakistan, they should go to India. The Asians who are of British citizenship, they should go to Britain. The Asians who qualify and meet and are Ugandan citizens, absolutely fine, those are Ugandans. Then the Asians who are stateless, you Britain, we need to discuss, Britain and India, we need to discuss this. And the cheeky British, of course, with the arrogance, say no, they wanted to impose them on us. You see what I'm saying? That was actually one of the bad relations thing, simply because the Ugandan government simply said, no, we have to discuss these things. So basically, so it's not about them versus us. And thankfully, I have authority of the most powerful Asian politically in recent times, Shafiq Arain, that was Uganda's last High Commissioner to London, because I don't recognize all others since they came after Museveni. Shafiq Arain was Uganda's High Commissioner to London between 1980 and 85 under Boti's government. He was a senior ambassador, so basically ministerial equivalent. And so that was deliberate. Shafiq told me that, Joseph, in fact, he's such a Ugandan that I would rather he were president than anybody else who's ever been president and ever been president except Milton Obote. So just we were trying to sort these things out fairly. And he would say, people who were British should go to Britain. People who are Indian should go to Indian. If they're non-citizens, And number two. Then number three, not boring you. There's another element of the economy. There are people who would go to the exchequer. Foreign exchange was not liberalized as it is today. So if you really want dollars, you have to go to the Bank of Uganda to do the exchange. So forex limitations are quite strict. So what I was also saying that, well, in this case, the Asians are predominantly business people yes. And they're running some of these small industries. Fine. But the point is, you can't be an Indian from New Delhi, with another connection to London, and you're using Namamve, as your sacking thing, you build a factory, go to the Bank of Uganda, take our dollars, come and do these other things, export,
all the money,
and you bank outside.
Yes.
So what I was beginning to say, no, we have to enable. So you see, this is a mean thing versus the other. So those were some of the disputes. Now, you see how Obote was doing it. Now, towards the end, it was basically, there was going to be a resolution in which the Asians who are Ugandans, the Asians who are Indians, both will compelled to go to India. And that you can't apologize for that.
So if I may ask a question just a little bit about that. In the event that there was no agreement that would have reached, first, for those who are non-state, how do you think that would have been handled? But even more to these others, do you think it would have been a different case if Asians from India or any other part of the world were deported back? Would that be different from what Amin did?
Yes, because the way the man Amin did was almost a sweeping expulsion. Although Amin also had some kind of formalities which is not talked about. It was rather too abrupt. So I don't want to go there because I don't want to spend time on that. But to give the comparisons, no, that would be a different thing because it was a diplomatic negotiations in which there was Britain, there was India, and there was Uganda, and it was civil on the table. Number three, any Asian who is deported to India, and raises their voice on Ugandans, Jesus of Nazareth, deal with him in India. You see what I'm trying to say? That's very important. There's an Indian, I hope you could even watch this, hit Obote like nothing. Her father had dubious deals in the 60s. The father was arrested, escaped to Britain, hit Obote like nothing. Thankfully, somehow in the media. we met on a television program when Amin died. This woman was screaming, whatever. At the end of the day, thankfully, Shafiq Arain was still alive, for my commissioner. Shafiq said, I was preparing to meet her and Shafiq, because Shafiq, you remember, an Ugandan Asian, highly respected, knew the truth, said, well, if only you could say the B word about what her father did and things like that. Those kind of. So Africans, we tend to get raw deal and we coy down. No, Uganda is Uganda. The Ugandan, black Ugandans who live in Britain. If you do so normally, that's absolutely fine. The Asians who are here now are citizens. And as I said, Shafiq, I would elect Shafiq, I would vote for Shafiq more than any other existing politician in recent times away from M7'S and away from Mr. But it's an Asian. But it is basically how and what people bring under the basis of their criteria. So at that time, if the British came and brought these guys down to us, just like some of these identity conversations, I don't want to get more controversial, some of these other identity things, including what is happening over the Balalo, people place these things emotively and blackmail others, and it's absolutely wrong. So that was the approach. So if at that time, it was unlikely that people were going to do what you call deported. Because it was a rich settlement, simply said that guys who belong to India should go to India. That's not deportation. You know what I'm saying? They'd be required to go to India. Guys who are British would be required to go to Britain. Now, the stateless, unlikely, because they're asking from a policy perspective.
Yes.
I'd imagine maybe if we ended up with, say, 200 stateless people, maybe the three parties can always discuss and simply say maybe lesser portion, maybe Britain you take 20%, 50% because you caused this thing, or India, these are indigenous population, and then for us, Uganda, we recognize that these people have been here and whatever kind of stuff, we take 10%. You can always do that, or you can do a criteria. Uganda could easily say that, well, all these people, any of them who's a doctor is allowed to remain. Any of them who's an engineer is allowed to remain. Anybody who's got evidence that they've been paying taxes is allowed to remain. Any of this one who's committed a crime is got a criminal record. They are not allowed. Nations do that. That was it. So that was the Obote way of enabling. So in Obote's time, it's crude to say that in Obote, one government, the economy was not in the hands of Uganda. From independence, we were creating an enabling environment in which to gradually hand over the economy to Uganda. And we did. Now in Obote too, the economy was fully in the hands of Ugandans. Compare that with the M7'S and M7'S, where he sold everything that we had built.
A lot of people had the sentiment that around the time when, before, of course, in the Obote first one, yes, before Amin came in, a lot of people had the sentiment, actually still do, a lot of them, that literally the most industrious and entrepreneurial community of Uganda was largely Asians.
And that is true, yeah.
And of course, there was that feeling. Do you think, in the long run, okay, in that perspective, policy or otherwise, how do you think that would have been reversed in the event that status quo continued?
The status quo was not going to continue. Because, as I said, as early as I think 1964, 5, 6, we had already embarked on this. And as I said, by 1966, 67, the British and the possibly Indians were already very uncomfortable. Interestingly, India, we had a reasonable relationship with the Indian PMs at the time, particularly the Congress lineage of later the Gandhis, the Nehrus. There was a reasonable understanding of that historically. So the status quo was unlikely to remain. But remember, even if the status quo remained in the sense that Asians were not expelled, the approach the Obote one government did, if you saw the status of indigenous African Ugandans in 1962 versus the status of indigenous African Ugandans in 1971 January, you will see that more indigenous Ugandans were educated, more indigenous Ugandans had access to healthcare, more indigenous Ugandans had access to public housing. In fact, we built public houses for indigenous Ugandans and public services who may not necessarily include indigenous Ugandans, possibly including Asians. Indigenous Ugandans were now able to, went into industry, got through promotional positions, they were in key positions, and indigenous Ugandans were thriving rather well in agriculture. So in other words, from an economic perspective, you could say, well, you could call it a bit of drip off this policy. But definitely it was never going to be the same again, meaning time was going to reach where the majority of Ugandans would have found themselves becoming the lead critical element in the national economy of Uganda. So it was actually fairly common sense. But the status quo was not going to remain because, as I said, it was a conversation taking place, and it's part of the conversation. But it's one of the reasons why we were overthrown. Obote II government was overthrown partly because of the British disquiet with Obote over the Asian question. People rarely talk about it. Number two, British disquiet with Obote's economic policy, as I said much earlier, rarely talked about. Number three, British and American disquiet of Obote's position in supporting Lumumba's forces in Congo. People don't want to talk about it. And above all, in part of the Obote's position, meaning UPC's position, on the question of the South Sudanese Anyanya conflicts and Israel and Arab North, Israel's interest in Uganda as an underbelly, a strategic policy that Obote refused, including the question of seeking to possibly divert the source of the Nile or River Nile should the war emerge between Israel and Egypt, which is basically the kind of war that is now emerged between Israel and the Palestinians. And Obote said no. And of course, by then we had programs for irrigation, including irrigating Karamoja. And the Israeli program was basically to be a program for. And finally, the big one was Obote's position as the chief spokesperson for the anti-apartheid movement. And of course, he touched the leopard's tail, something. When in Singapore, he had caused it to get the majority members of the Commonwealth member states who were willing to walk out of the Commonwealth and sink Britain unless Britain stops arms supplies to apartheid South Africa and desist from derecognizes the Ian Smith's apartheid regime in Zimbabwe.
So if you look at, from the side, the perspective of Obote and the administration, because I understand that's a place you understand very well. A lot of people, when they're talking about this whole Amin thing, some of them have mixed feelings because others are in support of Museveni's position. And others are entirely on the other side because they do not support Museveni as an individual, not the context of.
And for us in the UPC, we're objective, and also here I come from a fairly scholarly background.
Exactly,
yes.
That's what I'm counting on. Yeah. From the Obote perspective, if you look at Amin, is there something celebratable that this institute would have been at least a consideration? Because from the letter that the president put out, it wasn't from a point of, look, we are looking at this. Amin probably had this and that issues. He did this and that wrong things, as much as everyone else has had. But can we look at the issues of this whole idea, aside from who Amin was and who I was and what Amin did, and whether they were constitutional or not, aside from the acts of Amin? Do you think there was something to think about or to celebrate about Amin?
There was a Mafuta Mingi economic emancipation that is chasing away Asians, that many people went ahead and grabbed buildings, sometimes in an extremely crude way.
And a lot of them still think by that
in crude way. And so that genuinely, because we say we're trying to be as objective as possibly can, that there are people who see that their greatest thing. And so once in a while, actually, sometimes I meet people and they talk about Amin almost like Saint Dada, deputy to Mr. Museveni, kind of stuff. No. So as I said, that is a subject that I actually find, I don't know whether some history professors or indeed economics professors, on the basis of today's conversation, they were to pick some of these things and then critique and then play the numbers and play the figures and make the arguments. So if it's from that perspective, there's no reason why it cannot, possibly even from a political science perspective, be a subject of conversation. But as I said, do you do that under Idi Amin Institute? So as I said, your question still is a difficult one, in as long as we don't know the form the institute is going to take. Okay, and yeah, you as a banner presenter, your researcher should have come ahead and say, we understand this. But I also don't blame you because there's no information around which you guys should run. So no, so people tend to give Amin credit primarily, really, actually, because of that. So there is this almost, there is almost like a nuanced psychological presentation of Idi Amin as the man who was bad, the killer, the brutal guy, whatever kind of thing. People can go ahead and say, of course, he was a dictator and he never pretended about political parties and whatever, and whatever. But he loved Uganda.
Yeah.
You know,
a lot of people say that.
he loved Uganda. And so there's that argument, Amin loved Uganda. And like I've always talked to particular women who are abused in relationships, and I meet and talk to many young girls, young women, in relationships, and young guys, because I also tell young guys like yourselves, Roger, you and I should have a cup of tea one of these days, and I give you special instructions to make sure that you don't abuse young girls. So when you have this kind of conversations, yes, Idi Amin, love this kind of thing. But look, so do you harm love? Do you talk down love? Do you undermine love? Do you box love? Do you cheat love? Do you tell lies to love? Do you not share? Is there just a little bit of bread? Come on, darling, we share whatever kind of whatever love. No. So this love Uganda thing is a nonsensical myth. And it's a nonsensical myth because I think it compels Ugandans to think so low, especially because Museveni has sunk us so low that anything that can consolingly be positive is felt as a plus. No, you do not love a country and you break its constitution. You don't love a country and you break its community. So if Amin loved Uganda, he should not have overthrown a democratically elected government. And he should not have overthrown a democratically elected government with instruction from external forces. So Amin did not overthrow Uganda because he loved Uganda. Amin overthrew Uganda on behalf of Anglo-America and Israel. Now, I've given you a very important point. Yes, Amin overthrew the government, not for himself. He overthrew the government in order to save his skin, but he overthrew the government on behalf of foreign forces, including the forces linked to apartheid South Africa that later said, Amin said we'll go and bomb South Africa. Of course, now that's a understanding. So does that mean did Amin love Uganda? No. Amin also is almost certainly responsible for killing Brigadier Okoya. Inquiries found so. Your competitive colleague, simply because you thought maybe he was a contestant for army commandership. You don't do that. Amin also, as I said, was sent to Congo by Dr. Milton Obote to support, the Lumumba's forces in that place. But then he went in on top of that. How much he did support, I don't know. But he went on top of that to begin involving himself in cold, dubious deals. And Obote is a net clean man when it comes to corruption. And of course, corruption found him that. Did he love Uganda? He spoiled Uganda's name down there. And he used the office granted to him by the president of the country to go and abuse his position. Does that mean love Uganda? No. But then after that, what happened? Amin targets the ministers that Amin killed immediately on arrival, and the people whom Amin killed simply because they Lango, Choli, Teso, including Japadolas, and those Amin killed simply because they were UPCs who were everybody else, including possibly even one or two Balalo, so long as they were associated with UPC, and those other Ugandans that is killed simply because they're shadows, because they're considered to be possibly likely threats. Is that love for Uganda? I doubt. Did Amin have his other good side? We are all human beings. Finally, therefore, saying that if we knew about this institute, possibly a consideration to start with a memorial lecture would have been very nice, whether or not it was be accepted. So in a memorial lecture, you do like what I've seen Ignatius Musazi's daughter do. Ignatius Musazi is the father of Uganda's nationalism, as Obote is the father of the Republic of Uganda. I know Museveni is being very envious about this, but those positions are taken. Father of Uganda's nationalism is Ignatius Musazi. The father of this country is Dr. Obote. And the mother of this country is a position taken. People can go and dance. The mother of this country is Mama Mire. Ignatius Musazi's daughter, the other year's memorial lecture, I was not able to attend this one. He will talk about her father, including dad. Of course, Amin's children will know some very good daddy element of Amin. And there's a possibility that Amin, as a dad, would possibly have been a very good dad compared to many other dads. Because there's some very terrible dads around Kampala. There's some terrible dads around Kampala who beat moms in the presence of their children. Those are terrible dads. There's some terrible dads who cheat. There's some terrible dads who use the only shilling which is available in the house, and children go hungry and they go and smoke and booze it down the corner. There's some dads who even go ahead and do witchcraft and things like that in Jesus' name. I'm saying, and I'm being very serious, and they kill the possibilities for their children and families for generations. So I mean, possibly, may not have been those ones. I'm not saying this either or. So I mean, could have been that. And I mean, you could see him dance and maybe possibly go ahead and take his children for tea. And which child does not want the warmth of a child? Of course, I love my children, kind of stuff. So from that perspective, yes. But possibly Henry Chamber died the other day. Part worked with Amin and part worked with Milton about it. You know, Henry Chamber could come ahead and tell us, you know, the guy was very decisive, for example. You know?
Not cover.
Yes. And the guy also promoted the name of Uganda. Arguably, he would say, oh, yes. He said, I'm the conqueror of the British Empire. You know, yes. And the one also had and told the Bazungu to kneel down, then they take camera tricks pictures. Yeah, they're kneeling for an African giant. So, you know, so those. But really, to contextualize this to the other, have I answered your question? Not sure.
I would think so. let me read this before, just to get a little bit of context for people who might not have seen this letter. And then I'll ask my next question, which is also in line with that. The letter dated 5th October 2023 by the President addressed to the Minister of Education and Sports, who is the First Lady of Uganda.
Who is actually his wife.
Who is actually his wife also. Reads as this. I have seen the letter from Dr. Kagume of the National Council for Higher Education, inquiring about Honorable Fungaru's request to start Idi Amin Institute. This is a wrong request and it should be rejected. Before he gets into the merits of the issue, that is what he put out. Then he says, first of all, Idi Amin's government was clearly illegal. It had no right to install itself over our country. Why? By 1962, Uganda had a constitution under which we had the election of 1961 and 62. That constitution was altered in 1966 and 67 by a parliament that had been elected in 1962. Were their actions constitutional? That needs to be debated. However, Amin was clearly unconstitutional. Apart from his unconstitutionality, he committed a lot of crimes. Now, before he gets to that part, about the constitutionality and unconstitutionality of the government of Amin and his coming. Just a little bit, what do you think about our president, considering his history and how his government began, and the position it puts him, saying that, you know what, we cannot recognize a particular individual because the way they came wasn't constitutional, especially because this one also came unconstitutional, or would be thought. Because, I mean, you come illegally and then you become legal when you join. But what do you think about that?
I am just about to say that I'm very excited to confirm what I've always been told, that Museveni watches these shows, especially where I am, and that is some of these clips go to him. So, you know, yeah. So, and therefore that Museveni is going to be very excited about my continued reference to the mandates of the Parliament of 1962, that most of the things that happened, including the amendments of the 1966 Constitution, and the 1967 Constitution, notwithstanding the things that try people to say pigeon, all kinds of stuff, those were constitutionally done, and they were done with the mandate and by legislators who had been democratically elected. So Museveni was trying to give us that. I was about to clap, that here the guy has at last agreed. And then he said, you know, that is debatable. Mr. Museveni, you're going Kampora, why don't you just cross the line and say? Now, the lawyers, and I had a lawyer in another program earlier today, the lawyers would say that once a government comes in, when they come illegally and they constitute themselves, then
they become legal.
They become legal, whatever the case. You know, those kind of arguments. I don't have the clear legal narrative for it.
They're right.
But guess what? Amin's regime was as illegal as Museveni's, and as I said, Museveni's was worse, because at least Amin overthrew a government once. But Museveni went for treasonable act, went to break people's necks in Luwero, commit treason. And Museveni could say worse. Museveni did not only do that, but even went and used child soldiers. These are crimes against, crimes tried by, through by international courts and things like that. So he used children, and subject to, turned them as equipments and weapons of war. And he did many things. And as I said, we still even want to investigate the Lubero skulls. But Mr. Museveni, don't you worry. A future UPC government in which I am a party and involved in any way, we will not be seeking to hang anybody. But we basically want to settle this history, that who really did what since independence, and maybe who did what since the beginning of the name, the Republic of Uganda, so that we settle these things for our children. No, Amin and Museveni are not any different. Museveni does really not have a moral basis on which to judge Idi Amin. And you're absolutely right that his introductory thing is not one of a president. He actually needed to have been much more cautious. I'm actually possibly not even sure that he needed to have been the one to respond. In fact, if his wife is panicky, but I know they run the state as a family thing, in the very least, I'm sure she, this thing could have just been replied to by the authorities below the minister.
Even the council, the National Council of Higher Education, where they made the request.
But that's what I'm trying to say. By the National Council for Higher Education, and stops there. And maybe we'll be having a conversation and debate in which Mr. Museveni doesn't even say, no comment, and maybe say the institute has made its decision. That's what you do. But no, Museveni likes to grandstand. Every time he wants to get an opportunity, to gain and say, especially the Bazukuru, forget about the broken roads, and forget about the broken roads or the bumpy roads, you Bazukuru, me I love you, me I can even, this is terrible, me I've brought you and you myself. So no, I think it's an absence of leadership, and it's not statesman at all. The tone, the character, and the spirit of the letter. But also, if Mr. Museveni thought he was going to gain political capital, he's only very lucky that in the opposition, he does not have a UPC which is sharp as UPC should normally be. Because Mr. Museveni needs to be taken to task on this letter. And really, and I'm being very serious. So if we had an organized democratic political space, the political leaders would be taking Museveni to task for all political parties. The media would be taking Mr. Museveni to task. Possibly even some guys in the judicial systems should be asking Mr. Museveni about the legality around these things, because there's a debate. And above all, academicians. The last paragraph reads, therefore, it is not acceptable to license an institute to promote this or study the work of Idi Amin. It is enough that the forgiving Ugandans forgive the surviving colleagues of Idi Amin. Let that history be forgotten. I wanted to ask this question, and I want to make an unusual comparison, if you'll allow me. The people, and I'm going to compare you with Museveni, please, if you could allow me to do that. Most leaders in this country have a thing about someone from another government and not recognizing their energies. When you look at Museveni, listen to him. Most of the times they talk about what Idi Amin did badly and what Obote did badly and what anyone did before he came as something that wasn't that was sort of unpatriotic or something like that. When you look at, even I've listened to some of the leaders, even those who are in the opposition, including yourself, talking about the Museveni administration and the Amin itself, apart from the Obote administration. You seem to paint a picture, all of you, that this which I belong to is one that has done extraordinarily well, that the others have not done anything. Do we just not appreciate what the work others have put in, might have done bad or worse in some extent? But what does that also say about our leadership and our history and how we appreciate our history? I don't think you followed me enough. And I don't think you read me closely. Because while you might generally be right, I get very frustrated that people from all these other political organizations rarely and ever come up and praise the great works UPC did to this country and foundations UPC gave to this country in Obote 1 and Obote 2. And in many cases, without the institutional systems built by Obote 1 and Obote 2, some of them would never be anywhere, kind of stuff. Now, when it comes to, and that's for you're absolutely right about general about most of these political organizations. But that's about cheap point scoring polity. You know, the polity that has been created by Museveni, me, myself, and I. There is no qualitative political debates, let alone the space, that some of us possibly enjoyed as youngsters, debating in primary schools, and debating in secondary schools, and debating around our National Union of Students organization at the time that Museveni even banned and changed the names and gave it some other name. What's the National Students body called again?
The Uganda National Students Association.
There you see something like that. Who's this leader?
I'm not
There you go.
I only have a friend who is their speaker. He's a friend of mine.
Yeah. So you see, so these are these are some of the issues of the national character NR has brought. I want to tell you that for me, if you haven't picked that, I actually credited Idi Amin in this conversation.
You have.
Know,
No. That's not to discredit.
I'll be very, very disappointed. The only thing is, there is absolutely nothing to credit Museveni with. And I want to be absolutely honest with you. And by that, I'm genuinely very serious. And many people have asked me this question. I genuinely cannot find anything to give credit to Museveni to as a ruler. And certainly worse after 38 years. So the only other thing that I was worried, I used to be worried 5 years ago, that once upon a time, maybe I might give Museveni credit on security. So even security, the thing has sunk. But then today, thanks to NRA impunity, a security truck hit my car on my way to a television show this morning, you know, and they refused to stop. And to me, I can tell you, I courageously said, me ochieno of UPC of Nagongara, I said, no. I'm going to follow these ones. And of course, they're their flashlights. And I didn't know which one. They're just lucky. I said, whether these are the ones from Museveni's office, and it would have been worse had they been the ones.
Yes.
You know, or any others, I am going to follow this one. Okay, I need to use strong words actually this morning, because I'm quite annoyed. Particularly because they refused to stop. And I hooted, and thankfully at the motorists, of course, maybe because of now fear, because the other is whatever. And then mine, I'm also flashing here behind, although mine is just the little ones that Betty Kamia sympathizes with. It could still be carrying anybody. So when, until we hit, thanks to NRA traffic, these guys couldn't go anymore. So I got stopped down, got out of the car, and then it went to them. Now, it was then that they suddenly realized, in fact, obviously one or two of them recognized me. You know, so they sort of like melted and came out. Now, I'm saying, what can I credit Museveni with? So on the security thing, if you see the impunity, you know, on the security things, if you see how our children die in schools, how many of these rebel attacks, how now security is an industry, how, as I told you, what it took, when, and forgive me if I hope I'm not taking a lot of time.
No.
When Museveni and Kaira and the section of DP were really busy beating the elected government of Obote II government within Kampala, including in Kampala, yeah? The only minister who had a police pickup van following was Minister for Internal Affairs, Dr. John Luruza Kirunda, after he had been NRA attempted his life through a grenade, Crescent House, minister's office, missed him. So they did that. No other minister had a truck to follow. Ministers had one Mercedes-Benz, no police outriders, okay? No police outrider, a driver, and a bodyguard. Police bodyguard, all of them. The only other who had police outrider other than Obote was Paul Mwanga, who was vice president and minister of defense, and the Muganda, whom some people say, oh, Mwanga, kind of stuff, you know, whatever. So, and it wasn't quite clearly target. so that's what I'm trying to say. So those are the only guys. So now, what security thing? And the Muslims are throwing grenades into Kampala. So I genuinely have nothing. So this thing about peace, the other day I talked to some people. When you go to, you meet, and I met the other day, I got new members from is it Buko in Sebe?
Buko, yes.
They said, oh, Museveni brought peace. Now, what peace did Museveni bring to Sebe? When was there insecurity in Sebe? What peace did Museveni bring to Teso? When was there insecurity before Museveni came to power? You know, what peace did Museveni take to Acholi? When was Acholi insecure, except, as I said, the targets around Idi Amin's time? I can go on and on. So there's just nothing. The nearest thing, of course, to talk about is the women emancipation thing. But no, Mama Miriam was a delegate at the Nairobi Women's Conference in 1985.
No, Media was also first lady.
Yes,
so
yes.
That cannot be entirely credited as.
No. I'm giving it as context. Normally, those first ladies tend to lead on those delegations, by the way, as particularly at this time. So Mamire led the delegation. So from 1985, then these things built to the Beijing. And from the Beijing Women's Conference, global women's voices started to push for this women emancipation thing. So these things are an art. In fact, in Museveni's case, he was a policy director from US and Britain, that if you want to look cool, sample women and make them district women's kind of thing, and then they will whatever, and we shall support it, and then we'll get them. No, that's true. Just check, because this was not Museveni's thing. He didn't come with it. Where's Museveni's home? Is it Rokachura? Wherever. So nothing. But let me tell you the women's thing. I tell you that to me as Ochieno, the progressive left, the feminist, the women's emancipator, women's emancipation is not having one woman district member of parliament for 30 years, and you cannot ask her that, how many young women have you mentored? Tell me in your district. Okay, for argument's sake, let me be a bit unkind to Kadaga. How many women can Kadaga say, I have got a sample of 5 women, young women, from 27 to 45 in age, who are ready to take over from me in Kamuli? How many? In many cases, 0.
If she would be open to being taken by.
Precisely. What I believe in terms of women's emancipation, and what UPC did way back in the 60s, as well as 1963, you believe that to enable a woman, you give her education. And we opened up girl child school. To enable a woman, you give her health. You open up, including the maternity unit in Nagongara Para was opened by a military board. I don't know whether 68, whatever. I was too young, or I can't remember. But I was told it was a big thing. A powerful unit with, baby coats, which is as powerful as no other private hospital has it in Uganda today, that, as the best as I can tell you. You know what I'm saying? And that was in Nagongara at the time. And then what? They need water. Enable. They need agriculture. Enable. They need guarantees that their children reach the ages of 5. You deliver. Make sure that when they're pregnant, they will hit the 9th month. They deliver. That is women's emancipation. And then from there, in terms of employment, open them up. That's how the Bitamiziris rose into public service. So you make it a holistic growth, and that's for women, for young people, for anybody else. You add qualitative growth in people, rather than a sample. Now we have a Lanya minister, so Acholi is liberated. You have a Lupo, so Teso is liberated, so the Mukura families can't forget.
We want to break for a very short break, but okay, let's begin with this one when we come back. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. I'm very interested because, one, I love history as an individual, but also the fact that I get to learn a lot of things about where we have come from, because that says a lot about where we are going. So thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. We certainly wouldn't be here if you weren't on the other side of that camera. So we just stay where you are. We're going to go in for a very, very short commercial break, and then we'll be right back.
The Alternative Digitalk. Real issues, real talk.
Go to the church,
Tawali man, what's up?
Man, can you imagine people just dump everywhere? Someone drinks water and throws the bottle wherever.
Come on, Rogers. What else do you expect people to do with an empty bottle?
Simanya now, recorder. Do you know that plastics take at least 450 years to decompose?
What? That's a long time.
Exactly. Because plastics are made out of a lightweight and flexible material that doesn't decompose easily. And plastics everywhere in the environment cause plastic pollution.
What is plastic pollution now?
It is the accumulation of plastic waste in the environment, like bottles, polythene bags, straws. All of these contribute to plastic pollution.
I have been using them without knowing their effect.
Yeah, a lot of people have. Plastics are a danger to the ecosystem, both on land and in water.
So how can we overcome this problem? Is there something we can do?
Oh yes, we can reduce by minimizing the use of plastics, reuse by repurposing them, or recycle by collecting and processing them into new products.
Everyone wants to change the world, but no one wants to change themselves for the world.
How about we change our habits for the world?
And it starts with me and you.
This message is brought to you by Alternative Digitalk.
Are you craving for that special meal that will entice your taste buds and leave you with lasting, thrilling memories? Look no further. Spice Island Bulenga has got your answer. Natural, fresh and delicious juice, the best meals. Don't miss our daily specials from Monday to Sunday. Pizza Wednesday, Saturday Pizza Bonanza, you buy one and take two. Come dine with us and feel the experience. We are located at Prime Shopping Center in Bulenga, Mitiana Road. For inquiries, call us on 0704111720. Spice Island, we treat your cravings. Hi Rogers, can I ask you something?
Shoot.
What does corruption mean?
Well, summarily, corruption is abuse of public power for personal gain or for the benefit of a group to which one owes allegiance. For example, when a public office is abused by an official accepting or soliciting a bribe. By the way, private people can be corrupt too, like bribing police officers to escape fines.
Okay. So exactly how does that concern me?
Well, do you pay taxes?
I guess, yeah. What does that have to do with this?
Everything. Because those taxes you pay are supposed to facilitate services you use, like water, electricity, roads construction, medicines in hospitals, name it.
Okay, that is much bigger than I thought. But it can be stopped, right?
Well, yes, it can. Although it may not be as easy as it sounds. And here is the reason why. Corruption roots are grounded in our country's social, political, economic, bureaucratic traditions and policies.
So, what has kept it going this long? I mean, why don't we stop it?
Well, the main reason why it has been here for so long is because institutions are weak, either as a result of poorly defined ethical standards of public service, weak administrative and financial systems, or ineffective watchdog agencies.
What can we do to stop it?
At a national level, we must focus on strengthening the independence and effectiveness of public institutions that fight corruption. At a personal level, we must commit to never giving a bribe.
I promise I'll never give a bribe.
Well, that's a great decision you have made. Me and you now have to spread this message to all our friends. If we all do our part, corruption will be no more.
This message is brought to you by Alternative Digitalk.
The Alternative Digitalk. Real issues, real talk.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for still being a part of this conversation. My name, again, is Roger Storiawe, and what you're watching is the Alternative Digitalk, and the show is the Hotline Show. I am with Mr. Ochieno Joseph, and we're looking through a number of issues that have been happening around our country, and that is one of the reasons why we decided that we're going to do this, so that we come every single day, give you an analysis of how things are happening in and around our communities, so we can make better informed decisions. So when we broke off, I had just one last question so we can move to the next issue on the agenda. Was in the event that we had the context of this, the details we had, they sort of elaborated the value of this institution. Maybe let's assume they did put that value to only the National Council, they didn't put it in public. But in the event that we had the knowledge about what the institute actually wanted to do, do you think Ugandans would have some different sentiment about this whole idea than it is now that it's just about the name of Amin and his person?
It's difficult to tell because, in part, I think you're raising fairly important observation about political leaders and how they perceive their opponents. And while I was at pains to defend UPC, and quite clearly at pains to justify my inability to find anything good to credit M7'S, there's genuinely the case that the culture of this country is struggling, when it comes to objectivity and maturity in polity. in most democracies, including one or two that have been lucky to spend a few weeks and months in, leaders appreciate each other. Leaders appreciate one another. If you used to read my Sunday column in the Monitor, which is officially still there, I always challenged that the state should, when making decisions, once in a while, say that you, the citizens, you were demonstrating over Nagongera Road, and you turned up in large numbers or were very loud, we've heard you. We think we're going to review our position. We'll look for money somewhere to make sure that Nagongera Road is privatized, instead of people being whipped and beaten. I've just quote a note here from the wife of one of the people who's been detained, and she's very much distressed, as I say, is a mother of 2 young children, and she herself is quite struggling, a young lady, but struggling, with a health complication. That if something happened to a leader of a major political party at Kampala, or maybe they decide to have a demonstration, or they raise a major spirited position in the National Assembly, maybe that catches the eyes of critical numbers of legislators, and there is a cross-party conversation, and this is common, and maybe there's cross-party debate in support, and in many cases that is why that in a parliament in which maybe NRA has 60% for argument's sake, you possibly there'll be issues that you go and then you get a smaller majority, and they begin to say this matter passed by how many votes, by how many votes, by how many votes. So there may be maybe big critical things that maybe most of the governing members of parliament decide to defy their whip and vote with opposition, or in some cases there are matters which are not whipped, meaning that what they call free votes. Members of parliament vote on their conscience, and then you find that maybe perhaps the opposition won, but with the majority votes from the governing party. So those are democracies. And so therefore then you will expect to find leaders of different kind of political parties sitting and giving one another credit. But then also you will find opposition leaders going on to avenues like this and say, look, the government did ABCD, which was wrong. They did ABCD, however, which we agree with, and which we would support in future if they continue doing something along these lines. That is a level of civility that I do not see yet in this country, and certainly I don't expect to see it soon, in as long as Mr. Museveni continues to be in power, because Museveni continues to believe in doing things his way, and that people who come basically come to do so on terms. And those sometimes can be irritants and turn-offs for people, including like myself, who may sometimes want to wish to give you basically a goodwill support, because some of these may not necessarily be decisive, but merely goodwill support. I think those are the struggling reasons for that. Now, back to then on the question of these so-called institutes. As I said, it's a difficult one. In principle, as I said, there is no reason why anybody should not be allowed. I was with a colleague of mine this morning on a different television network, and he suggested that an Amin Institute is almost like a Hitler Institute, because he says that although the Germans have continued to forgive and move beyond Adolf Hitler, you don't hear any child named Hitler, which is a very interesting point.
Yes.
And it's also true that I'm not quite sure that many children called Amin, that you will possibly find anyway, possibly without prejudice, outside Kakwa, part of Western Nile. Understand to be corrected. One thing that I want to tell Mr. Museveni, which is very bad news, is that it's very difficult, and it will be very difficult to find children called Mr. Yoweri Museveni Jr. somewhere in Agongera. Museveni now gets quite a few free votes, lying votes, although he whips up people, open checks. But a name called Museveni is not going to be very easily available in future. But we are delighted that Milton Obote, there are many people named Apollo in the 60s merely. Many people called Apollo Milton Obote. Did you not know that Mao is actually Obote?
Oh, it's called Obote.
Mao, Milton Apollo Obote.
Hey, wait.
So it's not
Is that
Mao,
the meaning?
it's not Mao Zedong. I stand to be corrected. You know. Then there was another, actually, a friend of mine that died in a road accident in London, a sole resident, he's very sad, called Ordinary.
Ordinary.
He was called, so he called himself Mowak Ordinary. He's an in-law to a Professor Gumu, fantastic lecturer in Gulu University, senior lecturer. He was called Apollo Milton Obote. So when Amin came to power, they had to change his name, you know? So they decided to say Mowak, Milton Obote Apollo, and added a K. He used to laugh. Very nice guy, he passed, you know? Mowak. So you call Mowak, you know, Ordinary. And his surname became Ordinary. So, so you can see somehow stubborn this country can be. It's a pity, really, for my good friend, Odi. So we just used to call him Odi, you know? So no, it was a struggle for this thing. So what is still high? But on your point, ideally, we should be reaching those stages where these conversations be had. But that stage will be where if M7 embraces Ochieno's position and UPC's position of National Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And once we've done the National Truth and Reconciliation Commission genuine, not on M7's terms, including those funny prayers that he did in Gulu the other day when he was covering up the Acholi faces behind the Balalo land thing. When we do a genuine National Truth and Reconciliation, and people talk, people grieve, people cry, you know, facts come in, and we agree then to move forward. We will, and it will be possible. And it is a compulsory must. As for me, as I said, that was my major policy position in May 2005 when I returned with the backing of Milton Obote, the late president. It was an only branch for Mr. M7. Mr. M7, this is still available for you. Please, you know, pick it up.
Okay.
When that happens, and only when that happens, shall we then begin to start from the level where you're talking about. And you're very right, because it's very important for you young Ugandans. You need to begin to be having policy of objectivity. And interesting, coming from you, maybe you're telling people like me, and particularly older, that you're tired of this finger pointing, that it's time for you to begin to have soft politics rather than this crude name-calling thing of them versus us.
All right. Thank you so much for that. And I think we've done justice on that issue. You would like for us to move to another point that we thought would sort of tackle today. We have, recently, we had the United States announce that effective January of 2024, it is going to suspend Uganda, it's going to suspend Niger, it's going to suspend Gabon and the Central African Republic from the Agoa, which is African Growth
and Opportunities
Act. Yes, thank you so much. Which is, I think it started in 2000, if I'm not mistaken.
2000, yeah.
Now, that comes at a time when we have also had this, the World Bank the other day, a few months ago, say that, you know what, because of Uganda's position on particular issues, we're going to stop our funding to this particular country, and some of the other issues that happened. First of all, why do you think African countries in particular, because it has happened, I sort of tried to document a number of countries that has been suspended. Of course, suspended and then reinstated and then suspended. So we are in that circus, back and forth in circles. Why do you think African countries should even care about Agoa?
It's because you look through those countries and you discovered something very telling, not so? That they're all terrible dictatorships, and then you say, oh, my Uganda, well, we've been telling you that Uganda is a dictatorship and then there is a dictatorship. So no, it's very sad, actually, to find that Uganda finds itself with the Benins of this world, as far as some of these issues are concerned. But no, Uganda is a fudged system from 1986. But that said, it's rather cheeky hypocrisy by the Americans. You're right, Agoa came in the year 2000. In the year 2000, Uganda was a destination of choice for American leaders. Clinton, Bush. Ugandans, young Ugandans really enjoyed those days, Yes. That time, political parties were banned in this country.
Yes. That
time, I was in exile. That time, Acholo was banning, Acholo, majority of Acholo were living in concentration camps. That time, most part of Lango was in concentration camps. When we returned in regime in 2005, the concentration camps, including street children by the cathedral leader. That time, Teso was banning, So, fast forward to today, we won the rights to return to multipartism, so it's not credit to Museveni. You're going to crawl again, but we won it because he didn't give, nor did he let go. Number two, the guns that stopped in northern Uganda was not Museveni's choice. We did, and I've said on this program. UPC led in the campaigns to compel Museveni to talk to Joseph Kony. We recognize so that the majority of the people were our people. The majority of them were our members anyway. Actually, it was 90% UPC supporting, more than 12 perhaps. But most importantly, as Ugandan nationalists, we, Congress, we believe that anybody, anywhere in this country who was dying was our citizen. It was our fundamental right to campaign for them. And that if after 16 years Museveni has failed to quell this thing, could as well talk to these people. I remember an American diplomat saying to me, Joseph, that's one of the big presentations I made. Joseph, but now, whom do you talk to? Whom do you talk to? I said, look, so I told them that you go to intelligence, these people. First of all, we need to agree that we need to talk to these people. It will not be difficult to find them. But now, Joseph, what do you talk about? What do you talk about? I said, aha. We better talk to these people and let them, we will know why they're fighting, but suggest so I was non-committal. But quite clearly that's a point. Anyway, that was Uganda 2000 in Agoa. Today, Museveni has not brought peace, instead he's taken Balalo to where? To Acholi. But the situation is different, relatively. So this thing is not about necessarily human rights per se, it is about politics. Museveni's stars have just dropped. Accumulation of things and the combination of factors, including human rights abuses, have led to a state in which the states have said, well, possibly sort of enough is enough. That is the critical primary point I want to make. But number two, you ask yourself about Agoa. Is it a regrettable thing? It is. Because the industries, small, not many. I'm surprised Uganda didn't even make good use of it. That's how bad Museveni's economic policies are. Yes, but those that did, employed a few people. Some people made a few monies. Some people had opportunities to go to America and go and see the great works of Americans and come back into the potholes of Kampala. But some people paid school fees for their children as a result of some of those things. So no, the net loser in this are the average Ugandan citizens. But that said, were they really great achievements? I possibly doubt. I was very critical then, of course, and I think I issued a statement in London at the time as head of the External Bureau in then UK. And I was saying that, as I said, the Agoa thing was political, and it was about Anglo-America trying to thank and, continue to spoil their baby, Mr. Museveni, at the expense of Ugandans. Agoa was underutilized in Kampala and in Uganda. Agoa put its base at Bugolobi, at a coffee plant, where they took their apparels, yes. Put the girls, and would call them his girls. The girls were abused there, oh, leave my girls alone. So, new industrial thing, Museveni's experiment kind of stuff. No, but the coffee plant that Agoa thing took over was UPC's foundation. Coffee was our #1 net export, thing. Then, possibly still today, I'll go back to the figures very quickly. The coffee plant that we built, that's what governments do. We built the coffee plant, expanded on our economic advantage, and coffee is that neat thing, economic niche. And then that factory, Bugolobi, was the second most complex in the world, followed by one in Brazil, I don't know which city. Now you turn to an Agoa thing, and it dies. I don't know what economics M7'S studied in Dar es Salaam. But then if we can go into this, Uganda's exports to date, they're mostly agricultural. They'll tell you that the most important exports are coffee, takes 22%. By tea, cotton, oil, and fish. The cotton in Tororo, that used to take us to wherever for export. The other day I was coming from Tororo, Nagongra actually, to be fair, between Nagongra and Tororo, I only saw one cotton garden. It was the thing in almost every family. When we had cotton, we had the cooperative systems that functioned. People made big money. People bought bicycles. Would have been equivalent to border borders at today's price, actually, by the way. Meaning motorbikes. Some people bought cars. My uncle actually bought a car. Actually, two uncles of mine bought pickups. Using these things. They used to bring lorries and roll this to Nagongra Ginnery. Nagongra had a ginnery, meaning a factory. And the ginnery did the milling to take the cotton ends to the textile mills that made my clothes, but also the seedlings did the oil, as well. That was then. Point is, Agoa, was it just a deviation or not? Genuinely though, Clinton in particular as the pusher for this, they thought that, well, it is fair that we give open in exchange to exploiting and abusing African economies. We give them relatively easy, open access to our market with the competitive tax waivers, so that they're able to be competitive. Which aspect of Agoa from the year 2000, as a result of this policy, can we say the following exports, went to the US, they expanded from maybe $10 million US business, to $100 million. Or they started by employing 10 people, and then they go to 100, and they, things like that. So really, that said, is really neither here nor there. It tells you how in this country we basically live and survive by the following day by the grace of God. But most importantly, just merely by accident.
I wanted to get this idea from you, understand a little more. In 2016, particularly, that was the Trump administration that was at the time moving. When the East African community tried to, under the customs union, whole idea that they want to make free and open market only for the East African countries, part of the considerations were that they were going to increase tariff for especially like second-hand clothing that would be coming from some other parts of the world, including the United States. The president at the time of the US decided, you know what, he issued a warning saying that, you have to reverse this and publicly confirm that you're not going to move back to the ban, or you will be chased out of the Agoa. Now, those were three countries. That was, I think, around the time the others had joined, okay, but largely it was Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya. So at the time, Kenya decides, you know what, they moved against the idea and went back and decided, you know what, we're going to do.
We're going to become,
yes,
to become good boys.
Exactly. So they said, we're not going to move to the ban. We'll maintain the pre-2016 tariff fares and all of that, and that is what we'll do. And of course, there were debates about what the East African blocs themselves can do. And that is a question I also want to ask you. Now, I understand you have some ideas about the EAC. I think one of the shows before you've also said them. But do you think the East African, African, let me take it generally, African, because a lot of them sub-Saharan countries are part of Agoa. Do you think themselves, they can amongst themselves create a market that they can rely on? Each other, that they do not have to be bullied to become markets for the EU, for the US and the Western powers.
That in part is my argument, and I have had a a fairly detailed alternative conversation with the global media house on this, and I'm having a fairly big debate in the major media house midweek on Agoa with other experts. And so, no, and by the way, Agoa summit is ongoing in South Africa. And as it's ongoing in South Africa, I want to say that I was shocked the other day how my friend and Obi Okeloriem was dismissive about this, and it's a point I don't want to miss. But that said, when I was trying to tell you what was happening pre-Agoa, I was trying to say that actually we were generally running quite fine.
Without Agoa.
Without Agoa. And I was also telling you that, well, Agoa was given to us, you know, really to cool us as good boys. You know, and also that even if it was done as good boys, if we had sensible leaders, we would have made good use of him, and we didn't. Now, then come to what would be my solution, and that is what I was trying to say, hinting to you. Actually, Africa needs to put his house in order. Use this Agoa thing as a warning shot. And the plea that I've always done, you know, whether here in Uganda or when I'm elsewhere, in my local columns or indeed my columns, as you know, I used to write for the New African magazine, and I pushed this very much. African countries, African leaders, Africa basically needs to put its house in order. The example I was referring to of the 60s, we manufactured fabrics. Uganda, UPC, we manufactured fabrics from a cotton, to ginning mills, from the mills to the cotton factories, to fantastic top-grade fabrics, and exported to the topmost stores in UK and in US. This country, we did. Now, why don't we then, and that's why I was taking you back to this, why don't we then come back to this? What is the state of our industrial base? You know, we discussed the national budget here. How much is injected into training? How much is invested into skilling? How much is invested into technology? How much is injected to innovation? How much is injected to artistry, the sectors that possibly link together with fabrics, and so therefore lead us to, you know, if you like, embed an emerging garment industry? Think about it. Now, our current biggest import market is China. Where was China 20 years ago? Where was China 30 years ago? In fact,
the UAE, by the way. After China is the Middle East and UAE.
Indeed, and there was no China 40 years ago. And in fact, 20 years ago, if you put in a shirt from China, maybe you'll put up a shirt from China. Me, ochieno, will tell you that, no, let's have a conversation next week. Kind of stuff. Because you know what I'm saying? But now China leads, that is leadership. Yes. That's leadership. That's innovation. The Chinese sent their children to study abroad, not from family, not girlfriends' children, but children from China, citizens from China. You were discussing nationalism, Amin, you know? So they sent Chinese to study in America and Europe. America, many, many times, and that was that end of the world. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, part of the debate was that China was stealing technology from the West, you know? But China, to an extent true, sent their young people who were genuinely nationalistic. They go and they see how Americans were doing things, and then they took it back to China. For us here, we go and take, you know, whatever, and then we see how to come back and dance in Nyege Nyege. You know, and then we do this kind of stuff, and then we see how to bring their cars. You know, and we do like that, and then we see how to use their banks, you know, to stock the stolen money, the surpluses from Mabati. That's what we do. No. The East African community before the new one, the East African community has had leaders, particularly Bote and Nyerere. Less about Kenyatta, we say that very openly. Kenyatta was, but there were 3 East African leaders. The East African leaders had a conscious vision for the community, had a coordinated way of looking at things. We had an airline, we had a single rail system, we had a harbors corporation, we had, you know, and above all, once upon a time we had a currency, and so we were moving. So we had capacity to converge, as whatever convergence criteria, to return to a general East African Common Market. And so for that East African Common Market, we do not necessarily need the question of tariff. The issue then would be a tariff discussions around then the neighboring communities, in which case then SADC and Central African community groupings and West Africa, or indeed in this case the African Union should actually be urgently be having a conversation of a tariff-free continental market. And so therefore I must say that, interestingly, Ruto, including with this dubious way of coming to government, once in a while talks very interesting things, and so therefore him and Kagame, they like throwing some of these things. For example, these things like tariff-free and visa-free entries for citizens of Africa. That is generally fairly Africanist, regardless of the personalities, but those are the policies that we need to have. Yeah. I find it extraordinary. The other day, and this is an indictment on Mr. Museveni, one of my young mentees, and a lawyer, by the way, had to visit an African country, North African country, maybe I don't know if I expose it now, a North African country. And this girl had to travel by bus to Nairobi and by bus to Tanzania, I think Dar es Salaam, to go and get a visa to visit an African country, granted North African country. The embassy closed in Kampala. You can't do it online, and the Kenyans can do theirs online. Ugandan citizen, you can't, so you can see how much Museveni has sunk. Yeah. And you want me to thank Mr. Museveni and say that is better than Amin? You know what I'm saying? But on a serious note, it's extraordinary in 2023, if Nkrumah came, Milton Obote came, Patrice Lumumba came, and they sat. Mandela was more recent, and I want to spare him on this, but spare him negatively. I'm saying that I expect Mandela to have done more on some of these things, and pushed more on some of these things radically, because it was substantially listened to, and after he came and found a community was neither here and here. But I don't want to be unfair to him again, because he came out an old man and served one term. But one term, you can do a bit of a Magufuli. No, if these guys came, and then the secretaries of this world, if they genuinely came, and the Sengos of this world, if they came today and found what was happening to this girl, they would want to pinch Museveni. Nobody would say, I'd poke Museveni. But most importantly, they would be very sad with the leadership in Addis Ababa at the African Union. And so, no, we need urgently now to begin to pull together our economies. I don't see it happening yet. We have many small fiefdoms of rulers who are extremely interested in becoming kings in our nation states, and kings for their families rather than kings for the republic. So unfortunately, it's the bad omen. But the good omen is this, that the other day, for one day, I went to a television network and I got 2 new recruits joining Uganda People's Congress. But part of one of what they were saying, particularly the younger lady, a lawyer again, a different lawyer, at 25, she told me that one of the reasons that she's joining, and one of the conditions, is that she'll be working with me to develop a sports policy. So then if you have young Ugandans who are seeking to engage in the political process, but thinking policy, thinking strategy, that is what we need. Meaning that the Rogers, you guys, as soon as you become departmental heads for Uganda People's Congress in future, you're preparing yourself to become also the national leader. But in the unlikely event then that you do not become the national leader in that party, then you become a minister in Uganda People's Congress, and then you're pushing policy. Not these ministers who are instructed over Mabati, but ministers who are changing policies and programs. Because ministers in this country in the 60s changed lives. Ministers in this country in the 80s changed lives. And as it was settled about it too. There is no reason why today African leaders don't change so that actually we knock off these tariff things and then we really integrate as a continent quicker and faster.
And my question is also going to be about exactly that. Now we have the tripartite free trade area. The COMESA, Common Market for East and South Africa, the South African Development Community, and the East African Community. And of course, that's a part of the larger AU, Economic Integration and Development of Economies in Africa. Do you think Uganda has, under that umbrella, still can find an alternative to still do trade and market and not be affected by decisions such as Agoa's?
No, the Agoa's thing is basically subsidy, if you want to call it. The fact that actually they're selling to America without paying higher taxes.
Lesser. Is it lesser or no tariffs?
Paying lesser or no in some cases, I think, the details. Just merely that. So the point really, therefore, is that what are these things that Uganda was selling? If anything, actually, one of the two things that are actually very important that came from the US. One was that Ugandans, the standard quality of our products were wanting. So basically meaning that bureau standards work is questionable. But also the other, they talked about this human rights thing. Now the human rights thing is, Chris Barumisi said that the Americans should not blackmail us, meaning Uganda. And of course, therefore, in reference to the question of the anti-homosexuality legislation, I want to say this again very quickly on this. I just have no clue who advised Mr. Museveni to turn this into a political thing and to make sure that he punishes Ugandans like this and possibly punishes himself. And I hope that it punishes and haunts him politically, Mr. Museveni, whatever in a particular way. Because I said we had the legislations, provision, the statutes to deal with all these issues. But I think he wanted to grandstand. I also know that I think many of these countries had discussions with Mr. Museveni leading to this, and I'm told he opted to play tough. That's one. But then, two. But then number three, when discussing human rights abuse in Uganda was not necessarily about homosexuality legislation alone. Human rights abuses in this country, they disappeared. Today I got reports, one not only about the councillor from Toro councillor who is in prison. In fact, I'm told they were arrested in a demonstration and then taken to court and committed to prison. There are cases of criminals who spend several days in police cells, before being committed. This one, they did a fast tracker on that, maybe because they thought we were going to intervene and make sure that we get these guys released. That's true. And then, of course, today I also got a case of some of the young people who supported NUP in eastern Uganda, who went missing at the time. I didn't know for these particular cases, and I'm going to follow them up with the NRA guys. And then finally, the way Chagulanyi was treated the other day. So people don't lose sight of these other things. So this thing is not, talk about homosexuality is to say that minus the homosexuality legislation, Mr. Museveni is the deputy for Jesus, and the rest of others, his ministers and are saints, or in this case, the disciples. They're not. So quite clearly, the human rights abuse in Uganda, the Agoa thing minus the trade, we must actually think that, look, the situation in this country is not good at all, and the situation in this country is so bad that's beginning to impact on the lives of the people. Because Museveni doesn't care whether Agoa is applied or not. Museveni eats free money, his wife eats free money, his family eats free money, his general son eats the free money. They've got free cow dung, they've got free milk. These days they even have free land.
Some people are saying that using platforms like Agoa, the US literally is trying to sort of control or impose their version of democracy. What is your thought about that one?
No, it's common sense. It's true that it's an element of control, as I said, because that is their soft power. Anybody should be able to apply their soft power. The fact that African leaders have the incapacity to show their soft power shows actually how weak they are. That's why most of them actually should pack their bags and go and begin looking after their cows and goats. After that, some of them like to graze cattle. They should go and graze cattle and leave young Africans like you, to recreate a new Africa in which when you meet the Clinton juniors of tomorrow, you're able to have a conversation at par. So that's actually a matter of fact. Number two, as I said, the call human rights. As I said, which human rights? As I said, Uganda was in a very terrible state. The Americans did this Agoa thing with Museveni because Museveni was their darling. And Museveni was their darling not because Museveni was doing anything good for Ugandans. Museveni was not doing anything good for Ugandans in the year 2000. Museveni was doing good things, good for the Anglo-Americans in Sudan, in Congo. He had just done for them in Rwanda and in Burundi, and then said the Central African Republic. That's a fact. And in Uganda, he had sold most of our things to his friends, and he had allowed the capitalist market to come and perfect itself in Uganda. So doing what darling America basically wants him to do. What he calls him Nyampala, Nyampala meaning the headman for, for agents on the continent. So that's what he did. So now, that's basically the thing. As I said, any country should, and any leader should and must have the right to push for strategic interests for their countries. Now, I think I get nearly tired of blaming America for pushing for their interests as if we are blind, blaming America for pushing their interests as if we are kids, blaming America for pushing their interests as if we have no brains. I have lived around some of these people, and by the way, some of us are actually sharper than most of those guys. Because all of us are human.
That's true.
You know, in as far as some of these things. And sometimes when it's convenient, say, oh, why do they think we blacks were? No. We have chosen to allow ourselves to be ruled by dubious guys for 40 years without a mandate. You know? Nagongara Road was supposed to have been done 40 years ago by a Obote government. People went nyonga, and there no change. 40 years now, the roads are worse than roads to the Kral. People have rightly woken up on waking up, and then the simple guy ahead and said, no, we want our roads to be done. People are lying in prison cell. Now, those are the people, if they're doing it to the ordinary people, do you think they care, you know, what you export to Kenya tomorrow? They do not. They do not have the capacity to be able to do that. And finally, by the way, if we had an East African community that was working genuinely, you know, human rights abuse in Uganda would be a matter of discussion for the East African community leaders. Human rights abuses in Uganda or in Kenya would be a matter for discussions at Arusha in the East African Legislative Assembly. And maybe human rights abuse in Uganda would be something discussed in Addis Ababa. But these things are not done. I genuinely don't know what is going to happen, but I'm confident, and I hope that I'm confident that young, emergent Ugandan leaders like yourselves will make it possible that in the next 5, certainly 10 years, you know, this continent has changed and changed so that we have things on our terms predominantly. And when we go to negotiate around the world, we negotiate with our heads high and we negotiate on terms. And particularly because we're the richest continent in terms of our resources, that we're able to demand, that to make sure that our gold are processed here, and then we demand and influence and direct the gold prices in the global market. That because our coffee is tip-top, that we do that and we process it them here and do it as a finished product and make sure that Uganda coffee hits not only the London Stock Exchange and then the American whatever kind of stuff, whatever, but most important that when they hit those markets, that we're able to determine and influence the prices. And then you go to copper, then you go to Colbert, then you go to Colton, and then you go to our oil. That is what we need to do. And it is us to do that, not America saying that, okay, now we've done you guys enough, okay, now you can have okay, starting with Agoa. Just like some people think that M7 will wake up one morning and say, okay, I've had you guys enough, okay, go on, go on, Bazukuru, you know?
Speaking of negotiations, do you think that, because largely Agoa is about African countries, sub-Saharan African countries.
And it was rather patronizing, wasn't it? But anyway, carry on.
That's a wide idea. Do you think all of these member states, the qualifying ones to be a part of Agoa, the sub-Saharan ones at that, whether they are qualifying according to the American standards or not, do you think they stand a chance to have a negotiation? Because some of the problems that are caused, the anxieties that are being caused is because there's no sort of recourse. They cannot be this unpredictability. You cannot feel like this is unfair and you have anyone to report. It is the US that says it. You either qualify or you don't. This is our standard, and that is what.
But what negotiations?
Do you think there can be negotiations for these people who are receiving because the pact is necessarily for them? So
they're already begging for the whole thing to be extended, so that is not negotiation.
That's what I'm asking. Do you think they stand a chance to have a position as African countries, sub-Saharan, and say, look, this is made for us, and we have to find a way that this works with all of us, instead of you dictating what we do and how we do it?
No. Instead of you dictating, I think that will that one will not. But negotiating generally in principle where there's an element of give and take, and there's going to be an element of give and take. And the only reason there's going to be an element of give and take is not because Africans are in the strong position. It's simply because Africa is like a little, beautiful girl of age who's being, wooed by interesting suitors. In this case, in Chinese, in Mandarin, and Japanese, in Moshi Moshi, and Indian in Jangadi, and now possibly Turkey, and then definitely glasnost in Russia. So purely because of the new emergent and very apparent geopolitical dynamics, it is the case that these countries may have a possibility of blackmail negotiations because they know that if America doesn't give enough, they're going to go elsewhere. And I have already suggested that actually if we're importing predominantly from China, it tells you that, well, we're importing less from America. So we could easily go ahead and begin to import much less, from, from America.
Yes.
And some of what these guys could do is simply maybe just impose and a 1% extra tax on goods coming from America. That means, therefore, that the shirts and the shoes and the suits that are put on, which are basically, of course, they're not American for argument's sake, and that they no longer get them from there. You begin to look for Chinese market, and all of a sudden you begin to realize that actually Chinese suits, when you put them on, you can still go to the dance floor and make a move. And, so no, I think from that point of view. But I still insist, though, that African governments and African countries will not make for good negotiating partners unless they strengthen their positions. And to strengthen our positions is to improve on our quality. To strengthen our position is to improve on our own human rights records and practices. And so therefore, meaning that, well, you make it difficult for the other side to use and abuse and exploit you. And to do so is also to expand our industrial base and capacities. And so that means not only diversifying our economies, but also it may also mean that we are expanding our own domestic market. So really, you could argue that apparently, do you know how many Ugandans earn more than 1 million shillings a month?
Probably not very many.
Apparently, is it 1% or whatever? It's a very small proportion. And I was genuinely shocked. So therefore, for people who earn 1 million Uganda shillings, as I said, there are not many of them, and I'm saying it with absolute respect. There are not many Ugandans who earn 2 million Uganda shillings. There are not many Ugandans who earn 2 million Uganda shillings who are likely to buy the suit I put on as a matter of routine. And I don't put on expensive suits. And I'm being very serious. Did you get me, Rogers?
I did.
I'm emphasizing that point. And by that, it makes me a little bit annoyed. So it tells you how bad we are as a nation state, and including our economies. And the economies in terms of the wellness of our citizens, economic wellness of our citizens, economic capacities of our citizens. So therefore, if that means, if only we could double this to the other way around, yeah? If we could double it, it means we're also expanding on our domestic markets, consumer capacity. So as long as we now have Ugandans who got a lot, much more disposable income, yeah? So we perhaps quadruple, a UPC government would have made it more than 10 times what it is. And I'm not joking. I was just telling my UPC recruits yesterday that one guy who came to try and date my sister, you see I was sharp, tried to date my sister, was just graduated in Makerere University, and they had bought a new car using Boom, Makerere University Students Allowance, and we were laughing about it. And it was Peugeot 205. So that is how, one, strength of the economy, strength of the shilling, but actually, if you like, the relativity of the disposable income. I'm not confusing you. I'm saying that then if we have people, if we sort it out, if we grew our economy, if we expanded our capacity in terms of purchasing power, then we'll probably not need Agoa because we'll have enough people to buy those things from here and from Kenya and from Tanzania.
I have this question. We're running out of time, and I may not read all the questions that are out here. There's this particular one from Ethan Mwini. He says, how do you see the suspension impacting Uganda's position in regional and international trade? And what strategies do you think Uganda can adopt to diversify its export markets and reduce dependence on Agoa? Both
Chris Barumuzi and Henry Kiloriam, who are my friends, but whom I was very disappointed by their dismissiveness, suggest that Agoa will not impact on us. I disagree. So like I said before, no.
No, it will not impact because you didn't utilize the opportunity anyway, so it looks like we...
No, but even then, I still suggest that although it was a simple thing that I was even critical about, as I said, there were some few people. There could even be 100 Ugandans in the last 20 years, but those are Ugandans. Some of those are families. Even if by extension, some of them had 5 drivers, families of drivers, will still have, people will still have, earn some kind of a living. Yes. No, I think it's difficult beyond what I just labored to say. The only thing that Uganda can do is to try and diversify, domestically, and as I said, perhaps invest slightly more on some of the areas that I tried to talk about much earlier. For example, as I said, Uganda can, say that they've changed the government and, no longer they have a dictatorship for 40 years and it's almost a family rule, and then there'll be more tourists. A 5% increase in 5% rise in tourism in this country would more than cover Agoa plus.
Absolutely, yes.
You see what I'm saying? Yes. So, and basically that's an answer to that. But also on the other hand, Mr. M7'S says that he wants to develop a dairy industry in northern Uganda, meaning by Lalo, sacking Acholi land. No, M7 can decide that the Acholi who came from concentration camps, given cattle, designed in a cooperative way, perhaps if it is not individually, and boost the actual economy, and make sure that between that and milk, then we're able to export that milk to Kenya, which is basically our relative advantage. Substitutes for Agoa.
Your concluding remarks, sir.
It is sad that we discussed Amin in the manner in which we did, and in a rather unconclusive way, and particularly how you challenge the leadership, those of us in political leadership, by your view that political leaders are rather intolerant to each other, and that we don't appreciate others. I think as far as this is concerned, UPC is most sinned against than is sinning. But whatever happens, it's a lesson that all of us must learn, and it's a challenge that I take. On the question of Agoa, as I said, Agoa killed our coffee plant in Bugolobi, and right now I don't know why Agoa was such a waste of time. But Agoa still is a possibility. We don't want to dismiss it. In fact, by the way, minus that, I don't think there is a nation state that does not want that in 20 years' time from today, the economies are not only so diversified, but that their dependency, external dependency, is also so diversified that they're not confined. So therefore, it's of strategic interest for Uganda that in 20 years' time, whatever then the cotton industry that UPC is going to revive has a market for finished products in America, in Europe, in China, and South America, particularly in the Caribbean, where me, as ochieno, President of Uganda People's Congress, I'm very anxious to open up relations with Africans who were taken to the Caribbean as slaves. It is possible for us as Africans to work together, integrate our markets. Very urgent that we should invest in coordinated and integrated communication systems where we got our railways from Cape to Cairo, and we got our railways from Dar es Salaam to, rather from Mombasa to Accra, and that we got airlines and systems that we don't have to go via Europe in order to go the other end to just merely Libreville. There is so much potential for this continent, but its lack of leadership is fundamentally a crisis, and is one for which we need to invoke our gods. But our gods are just like somebody said, that there is something funny about these Africans, man, particularly we, and not, that we, while the Israelis fight, and that's a war that must be condemned strongly, their war using rockets, and that the Africans want to believe that the Israeli God will come and sort them out. No, we need to sort out ourselves, and do not sort ourselves by making sure that we protect all Africans, and because every African life matters.
All right. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you very much. I think for me, as we leave my major, especially about Agoa, I have particular interest about Agoa. And the interest is not because we have been suspended. It's because it's a very big opportunity that we never tapped.
Yes.
In the same year that I think countries like Nigeria had exported to the US about goods of about 300 million US dollars. We exported about $10 million.
Are you sure it was not 8.5?
It was very, very, very embarrassing, quite honestly. So my feeling is that these opportunities, aside from the fact that some people feel like Agoa should not be a big thing because we weren't earning so much from it anyway, and our economy will not be affected. But the economy has been affected because we never utilized that opportunity in the first place. So I hope that moving forward, some of these initiatives, even if it's for just a year, we do focus and look at how much we can maximize and get from it. Because at the end of the day, it's our economies, it's our families, it's every one of us who benefit from that when it happens. Other than that, thank you so much for being a part of us. Thank you, sir, for sparing your time and speaking to us. My name is Rejection. I thank you very much, and the people who have been supporting this progress to make sure that you get the information as it is. Lillian Lloyd and Arnold Anthony Mukwese, thank you so much for doing a commendable job. Everyone else, have yourselves a very good evening.
The Alternative Digitalk. Real issues, real talk.